Hey everyone, this is Dr. Kerry Magra, and I am a professional speaker, best-selling author, and autism entertainment consultant. I also am autistic and was diagnosed with dysgraphia, and I'm here with a very special guest tonight. His name is Paul Silver. Paul Silver wears many hats within the autism community. In addition to that, he is also himself a self-advocate who works a great deal in terms of legislation. And he also wants to further his own self advocacy in the field of employment and independent living. Paul was diagnosed with autism at 8. He is now 32 and he has found employment, which he'll talk a little bit about in tonight's presentation. But first and foremost, Paul, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine, Carrie.
Awesome. Well, Paul, first question I have to ask for you is, what would you like the world to know about you?
Well, first of all, I am a self-advocate. What I like the world to know is basically I'm trying to figure out my next goal, because in the past 2 years I moved from Georgia to Florida. So I was planning to do something last year, but the pandemic happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how are you doing with this whole routine change of the pandemic?
Well, I think the first few weeks of the pandemic was kind of tough for me. But once I got used to it, I work in my practice, I'm in a medical practice, so we have to wear a face mask. So it took me probably a week to get comfortable wearing a face mask.
Got it. And can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you're currently doing today for work?
Yes, I currently am. I scan documents for a medical practice.
Nice. And how long have you been doing that for?
Well, I've been doing this for about a little over 9 years. This is in this practice I work for now. I'm over there for 2 years now.
Nice. And what got you interested in being part of that line of work?
Well, it started. The reason why I'm in the medical field is because my uncle was a physician, and he offered me a position at his practice, and that's what brought me into the world of medicine.
Nice. So, Paul, obviously you were diagnosed with autism at 8. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about how your parents went about getting that diagnosis and what some of your early challenges were?
Well, I think the first person that realized it was my second grade teacher, and she told my mom to get me checked out by my pediatrician. There we got my confirmation of my diagnosis of autism/Asperger's syndrome.
Nice. And for people at home who are kind of trying to figure out, so I actually just received a question from a parent the other day who was asking me a little bit about Asperger's and what was the difference between autism and Asperger's. Were you actually diagnosed with Asperger's, or were you diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder?
I think it was more Asperger's, because what I told people was, when I had to tell people I had autism, I said I have Asperger's, which is like a mild version of autism.
Got it. And Paul, so you have obviously worked on autism legislation to help support our community. That's why the tag for tonight's presentation is Autistic Man Advocates for Reliable Autism Resources, because that's what you've been doing in our community. Correct. Can you talk a little bit about the legislation that you have helped work on to support our autism families?
So my first initiative into autism legislation was, I think it was 2013, when I was watching a news story. It was showing my first mentor, Anna Buller, and she was fighting for ABA's law, which was autism insurance reform for ABA therapy. So
got it. Go ahead. Sorry.
So 2013, it did not pass, and I vowed to help Anna Buller to get this passed.
One more time. What was it that you said that you got passed?
It was called ABA's law. it was called Ava's Law. It's in Georgia. It's for Georgia's autism insurance reform.
Nice. So, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about what Ava's Law does and how is it supporting our autism community today?
So today in Georgia, it supports insurance coverage for ABA therapy for people with on the autism spectrum. When I first did, they wanted at age 6, and then they went back in 2018 and they made it up to 18.
Nice. Is that something that you think we need more of in terms of the services? Do you know, for example, if there are any other states that have that outside of Georgia?
Well, all 50 states have some form of that legislation and on their book. So all 50 states are green now.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. So, and obviously, you are also an advocate, not only for legislation for the autism community, but you're also an advocate for employment and independent living. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you is about the whole employment aspect. Now, obviously, the majority of autistic adults are unemployed or underemployed in our communities.
Correct.
What are some steps that somebody who's trying to get a job who has autism should do based on your experiences finding meaningful employment today? So
basically, the sources that I use, this is why I'm fighting for more employment opportunities, is that when I started out after high school, I was working at a restaurant, and for majority of my tenure there, I worked 6 hours a week, 3 hours on Saturday and 3 hours on Sunday. Then after that tenure, I worked for my uncle, but it was not paying the bills, so I had to get a second job. So I was completely out of, and it's not help that your parents still have to help you a lot with your finances. Then I moved to Florida because my parents were having trouble funding me back in Georgia. And I found a job here doing the same thing I did for my uncle, but it pays a little more for me.
Nice. Nice.
Throughout my tenure of an adult, I worked with a state program called Vocational Rehabilitation, and I could say my tenure, my working with them was a joke. So during my tenure at Steak and Shake, I had like 5 different people work my case, and they left for different various reasons. When my uncle offered my job, I called Book Rehab and told them I found a job. I didn't tell it was my uncle or anything like that. And fast forward to 6.5 years later, I'm probably had enough working for my uncle, and I started going back to Book Rehab, and it was the same. It's like nothing has changed. And the funny thing was when I finally moved to Florida, they called me back and said, "We're ready to help you." And I said, "Too late. I moved to Florida."
So, Paul, obviously, and for everyone watching at home, my name is Kerry Magra, and I'm here tonight with Paul Silver. We are going to be answering your questions as well. So feel free to write them in the comments, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can during this Facebook Live. Paul, obviously, there's a lot of misconceptions we currently have out there in the autism community. What is one misconception you currently see out there in the autism community that you wish was debunked?
That's easy. Vaccines cause autism. I can't tell how many times I have to tell people that it does, and I just feel like some people don't get that I'm intelligent and know stuff. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely hate that too, because there's no scientific evidence that explains that vaccines cause autism. And I know we have an anti-vax community who are very, very, very powerful and advocate a lot. But at the end of the day, I just go back to the facts and kind of leave it at that. Anyways, so we have a lot. Oh, your friend Ryan has just come in. So Paul, you have a lot. You have a lot of questions coming in, and one of them in particular is talking about. So, for example, Justin is writing, Carrie, can a high functioning autistic person have any job or career they want? Justin, what would you say about let's Paul, let's take this another way. What would you consider autism functioning labels? Do you like when people call somebody high functioning or low functioning?
Well, how I say it is, I basically say I'm on the spectrum. But when someone describes their child's autism, I don't care about the wording, because I work in the medical field, so I know what I'm dealing with. But I had a friend once who got offended of me saying I have Asperger's. And her reason was it was named after a Nazi scientist. And I said,
oh, wow.
I thought to myself, that's stupid. I'm Jewish. I could say growing up in Judaism, in a Jewish family, I was exposed to a lot of the Holocaust stuff. So that doesn't. It's like you get offended so easily. This is why some people get offended when they talk about cancel culture. I just feel like some things do not. I understand why they may do it, but canceling it right out, there has to be some other option to do it.
Yeah. Paul, let's go back to your work right now in the medical field. So obviously, there are groups like the group I work with called IBCCES who are going around the country and making hospitals become certified autism centers to train employees on how to interact with people with autism. So what would you say are some things that our doctors, our nurses, everyone who works in the medical field have to do a better job of to support those with autism?
Well, I haven't interacted with anybody patient-wise with autism. I think the issue is basically if anybody's like, there's a term if you're scared, if you have fears of anybody has fears of a doctor, regardless if they're autistic or not. I think it's more of like how the communication is between patient and physician. I think it's more of how you communicate with your patients. There's some doctors that will come to your level, and then there's some doctors that will tell you this is what has to be done.
Yeah, I love what you just said, because I feel like a lot of the times the doctors sometimes don't talk to the autistic patients and they talk to their autistic parents, even though some of the autistic patients are capable of having a conversation like we are having tonight. And I feel like there needs to be more of this whole entire assume competence kind of mantra. It's like we need to make sure that we are having individuals actually having conversations with us and not seeing us as somebody with autism and necessarily thinking like, oh, they have a social communication disorder, they can't talk to us about this certain situation. That drives me absolutely nuts. I don't know if you kind of feel the same way.
Well, when I worked for my uncle, I had trouble communicating to patients that if I feel like something's wrong with their EKG, I would walk out of the room to find the doctor just to verify that it's okay. but I explain to the patient, this is why I walk out of the room, because I'm just trying to figure out if this is okay. And I said that if it was bad, the doctor will come right back in. So if you just see me, I'm good. You're good.
Absolutely. So, Paul, obviously you have a job today. What are some of your hopes and goals for yourself in the future?
Well, right now I'm going back to school and studying medical billing and coding. And I
Oh,
made
that's
Dean's
awesome.
List.
Where are you going to school?
Princeton University, and I made Dean's List last semester.
That's awesome. Paul, we should talk because I have an autism scholarship program for those who are pursuing a post-secondary education. So if you're interested in applying, I can definitely send you the application link for our spring 2021 scholarship.
Okay.
But that's really great. So when is your expected graduation date?
It's supposed to be in the summer semester.
Oh, wow, nice. And what are you thinking about doing with that? Obviously, coding, you can do so much. Well, what are some of your hopeful goals after you graduate?
I hope to pass my certification test, because after you graduate, you have to take a certification test. And just make sure that I can find an opportunity that I can work with. Like I was looking at someone post on Facebook that United Healthcare has like a program for people with autism that want to get into their field.
Nice, very awesome. So, Paul, we have a few people writing in the comments saying congratulations, and also Dean's List. Paul is writing woohoo. That's very awesome. That is so great, Paul. That you're getting some love tonight. So we had a comment come in from a woman named Debbie, and she said, "They say my son is high functioning. He's on the 6th grade, but not on grade level. He reads on maybe a 2nd or 3rd grade level. How is he considered high functioning? I mean, he's super smart. He wants to be a doctor." Yeah, Debbie, I'm not sure if that was a question or a comment, but feel free to elaborate in the comments, so we'll try to get back to that later. Your boy Ryan wrote, "Isn't it aggravating that people judge us on the superficial traits we present on the outside and not get to know us for who we are on the inside?" Does that bother you, Paul?
I think it does bother me. I think some people. Well, I think people have to know me before I can tell them I'm autistic. I feel like what Ryan's trying to say is based. I'm thinking people judge you no matter what. So I think it's hurtful, but I think it's more. I think people believe certain things, and we try to correct them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. So everyone, again, my name is Dr. Kerry Magra, a professional speaker and author who's also autistic. I'm talking with my friend Paul Silver, a self-advocate who is doing some incredible work in the autism community. If you have a question for Paul, write in the comments, so we'll try to get it during the Facebook Live tonight. Paul, so obviously we were just talking about misconceptions. What is something you should not say to somebody who has autism? I know obviously the misconception of vaccines you mentioned, but is there something that somebody has said to you about your autism diagnosis that you wish they didn't say?
Oh, well, it's definitely the R word for the R word. It's based.
I agree. Yeah. How has that kind of what have you actually been directly called that word?
I think indirectly. I just can't remember the time it happened, but that's one.
I love this question that came in from Jody. Hey, Jody, thanks for joining us. Jody writes, "What is one thing you would like to tell to younger autistic kids?" That's a really good question, Paul.
Well, I think what I would tell younger autistic kids is your disability is your autism is is a gift, but do not use your gift as a curse.
So, Paul, obviously in our community, if you met one person with autism, you met just that one person with autism. And autism is a spectrum, and there are individuals like us who are able to speak, have full-time jobs. I mean, you're a clerk. I'm a public speaker who travels the globe and talks about autism and other topics. But then there's the other side of the spectrum where there's going to be people who are going to need 24/7 care. And I know this is a tough. I know this is a tough question, but what would you say to a family who might be watching this who don't necessarily consider autism as a gift? The individuals who are really going to need that.
You think it's more like a burden? I think what I tell them is, well, you know Judith Usetti, right, and her son Jack, right?
Yes, I actually tagged Judith in this Facebook post. I hope she can jump on. Fingers crossed. But yes, yeah, I love Jack. Yeah, I absolutely love him.
Yeah. So, from my understanding, he's on the track team of his school. From my understanding, so that's accomplishment. I think people underestimate people that are on what we call the low end, but I think you'll be surprised. That's what I say. I'm surprised of Jack every time I see a post from Judith.
Yeah, and you know what? That just goes to show. I think a lot of the times we look at autism, and there are comorbidities that go with autism that I think a lot of people don't talk about, that have more to do with the actual challenges that those with autism face versus the actual diagnosis. And that's just my personal opinion. But
the other thing is there's also support groups that I'm aware of. Like when I lived in Georgia, my mentor Claire Dees, she had a support group called Spectrum Autism Support Group. Ironically, she had this since 1998, and I was the first group of children in that group, and I did not realize it until I rejoined in like 2013.
Okay, got it. So, Paul, we had another question come in for you from Yolanda. Hey, Yolanda, thanks for joining us tonight. Yolanda writes, "What does Paul think has helped him the most to help him adapt in society and with socialization?"
I think it's more of like when I was telling you about, well, when I'm in a room with strangers, I'm in the corner. But if I usually do is try to have someone I know or try to have an icebreaker conversation. I think, so when I first moved down to Florida, the local comic book store had trivia night, and I teamed up with people, and it was basically, they were surprised how much I knew about the topic because we won first place in the competition.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Paul, what would you say was one of your greatest accomplishments while you were in school? Obviously, we're both in our early 30s. What would you say was one of your greatest accomplishments? And obviously you're in college now, but especially in K through 12, was there like a milestone that you reached which you didn't know necessarily that you could achieve?
Well, when I found out my diagnosis, I was 10, but I was terrified to tell my peers until I was 14. I think it was an accomplishment because when I finally did, the kids just said, "Big deal." I'm like, so what was I so worried about?
You know what? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
The other biggest accomplishment is not school related. Is that I got bar mitzvah. So that's one thing I want to know. And then I had like great teachers like Miss Q and Deborah Browning and Miss Woodside that helped me throughout my public education.
Oh, that's really sweet of you to give them a shout out. I definitely hope we might be able to share this link with them afterwards and just let them know how they impacted your life. That's really important that we give shout out to educators. Jeremy writes, hey, Jeremy, how you doing? Jeremy writes, do you recall when your parents first brought up your diagnosis? If so, how did they do it? And do you remember how you felt initially? So you were kind of just talking about finding out about your diagnosis at 10. How did they bring it up to you, Paul?
Well, I think it was a combination of my parents and my autistic resource teacher, Miss Deborah Kewen Browning. I think Miss Kewen pulled me out of the classroom and read me a book. I still have the book in my bookshelf. It's called What Do You Mean I Have a Learning Disability? And then she explained to me what my disability was. And then my mom said, "What did happen at school today?" And did Miss Kewen talk to you about something? I said, "Yeah." And she showed it. She showed me that the book was. I had this book. She just found it and gave it to her. I think it was more people were. I just didn't know how people would judge me when I found I was diagnosed.
Got it. Yeah. So, Jeremy, just to tell you a little bit. So I actually learned about my autism diagnosis similar to Paul. I was about 11 and a half. And we were playing disability celebrity bingo in a social skills class where we were learning that Michael Jordan has ADD, Magic Johnson has ADHD. At the end of the class, the teacher says, all these individuals are special, just like you. And then I asked my parents right after school that day, well, my teacher said all these individuals are special. And they said, I'm special too. So why am I special? And that was the first time they told me about my autism diagnosis. So, Jeremy, we actually, one of our last webinars, which ironically enough, Paul was able to come on to and actually shared a wonderful testimonial, is on helpful tips to explain your child's diagnosis to them. So, Jeremy, if you're interested, I'll include the link in the comments so you could take advantage of that workshop. So we have a few more comments and questions coming in. But Paul, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about tonight, obviously you mentioned in your bio, was you wanted to be an advocate for independent living. Now, what are some things that parents have to look at when their child ages out of school in terms of helping find them living opportunities?
I think it's more of when I moved out of my house, my parents taught me some things to do, like how to cook, how to clean after myself. But when I moved back to my parents, when I was transitioning from Georgia to Florida, I lived with my parents for like over I think it was over 2 years. That my mom showed me how to cook some things more, some other ingredients. So I got a better understanding about what I cook instead of grabbing a TV dinner and putting it in the microwave.
Got it. And Paul, when did you start living independently?
I started living independently probably when I was in my early 20s.
Got it. And was that something that you had to work up to? What were some early things that you kind of thought about before transitioning to living by yourself for the first time?
I think it was like a difficult conversation both me and my parents had. I think it was more of how do I live with myself? And besides, I have my 2 cats with me that live with me, so I have to take care of them as well. So it shows me some responsibility with my cats.
Got it. Speaking of cats, what is your thought about animals helping those with autism? So obviously Temple Grandin comes to mind as the leading autism advocate in the world.
Well, how I got into get dog and my cats. My younger brother Daniel, he signed up for the cat room in our local PetSmart problem was he was 14 at the time, and he had to be 18 or older to do it. So my mom had to come in and help him clean the cat cages. And eventually we fostered cats, and then I adopted my first cat from my mom named Tigger. Sadly, Tigger passed away a few years ago. And then I adopted my my other two cats, Tinsel and Spice, from the organization.
Got it. Because I know so many people who are looking for service dogs in particular for their child. Have you heard of success, especially when it comes to animals, in terms of being service animals for kids with autism?
Well, I heard of service animals for dogs with kids with autism, but depends on what the service needs. My friend Dallas, he has a service dog, and I think because Dallas suffers from seizures, that's what the dog's for. But when it comes to my cats, I think it's more like a comfort thing for me, even though they're not physically comfort animal, have service animal credentials.
Got it.
It's just,
So, Paul, I love to ask this question to each one of our guests who come on our Facebook Lives. What would you consider to be the most helpful thing that helped you during your childhood, just growing up with autism? Was there any one specific therapy or any one specific person that really helped you the most growing up?
I think that was my parents, to be honest.
And what was some of the? Oh, go ahead.
I did, but it's more like I had great teachers and mentors, but it's always there's always my parents I could turn to as well.
Got it. So, Paul, we have another question that came in. This one's also from Yolanda. Hey, Yolanda, once again. My son is autistic. He is 5 years old. What would be your best advice you can give to Yolanda to help her little boy?
Well, when it comes to parents, I think it's more of I remember a state representative actually called me about how do I tell my son that he's autistic, and my first question was, how old is your son? And he said 10. And I said, you should tell him now, and you should also tell him this doesn't change how much we care, love you, or care you. It doesn't mean you're going to be treated differently. I usually tell parents, just because your kid's autistic doesn't mean you should treat your other children as second class because your child has special needs.
No, that was really well said. Sorry, Paul, I just didn't want to cut you off. But for those who might have, Paul, are you an only child?
I have 2 younger brothers.
Got it. What would you say is the importance of the dynamic that siblings play? I'm an only child. I'm a spoiled only child. So very spoiled. What were some of the things that your siblings kind of did to help you when you were growing up? Obviously, you were the older one, but were there any ways that your siblings supported you during your journey?
Well, I think during my childhood, we stuck together. The thing was, I think we do argue a lot, but we do care for one another. I think it's more of, I remember during my bar mitzvah, my Torah portion was about Joseph holding a grudge against his older brothers. And I said in my speech we do fight, but we don't hold grudges against each other. I just think at the end of the day, we still know that we care for each other and we're still brothers.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, at the end of the day, we all get into fights regardless if we have siblings or not. But at the end of the day, you know, blood is blood, love is love, and we're just trying to keep it moving. Awesome. Very, very, very well said. Very well said, Paul. So we obviously have a few self-advocates who jumped on in the comments to share a little bit about their own personal perspectives of growing up with autism. For families who, well, especially for children, do you think it's important for them to know about their autism diagnosis at an early age so they could self-advocate for themselves?
I think it's more. I think it's when the parents feel comfortable. I think because I was diagnosed at 8, so I can't speak for someone who has a child that was diagnosed at 5. I should say if they understand what's going on, like when I talked to that state representative, I said, does he notice that there's him and his classmates know that he's getting some assistance from like paraprofessionals? And he said, yeah. I said that he's getting an idea of something, so you should tell him why they are doing this. Like I was in special education since I was in first grade. So so you really, I think it's more like, can your child take the news? And most of the time, I think they can, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And for people like Jeremy who came on tonight, definitely check out our workshop on helpful tips to explaining the diagnosis. That will break down a lot of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, some additional resources as well. So definitely check that out in the comments of this post. We had a few more people thanking you for answering their questions. Awesome. So, Paul, what do you like to do in your spare time too? Obviously, we're talking about a lot of questions to help families. Well, what do you like to do in your free time?
Well, right now I'm studying for my coding and billing, like I said before. What I like to do in my free time, well, there's not a lot to do because we're in a pandemic. But I think what I like to do is like to go to the movies, trivia night. And then my friend Mark started a Zoom group, and that's how. And we talk and we have like Zoom group meetings. So that's great.
Nice. So obviously, well, first off, trivia. I love trivia. Well, what's like your go-to like trivia? Like I'm a big sport guy. So whenever there's like a sport trivia question, I'm all after it. Well, what are some of your like best, like I know this answer, I need this category in trivia nights?
I did watch the show called Once Upon a Time. And it's basically, I don't know if you heard the show, right? It's like cursed fairy tale characters.
Yeah, very cool show. Very cool show.
And then the other show I've been watching is 911. And the episode that they opened up with this season, I was dreaming they would do this episode, is having a first responder with an autistic character.
Did they actually have one?
Yeah, I think from my understanding, the actor is autistic. But here's the thing. I thought the kid that played from Atypical was autistic until I found out he wasn't. Like, you know, Dr.
Yeah.
And like shows like The Good Doctor, there's parts of, I can't watch it because it reminds me my first days of medical practice. The actor did a good job, even though he's not autistic. I can't watch that show because it reminds me of my first day of that happening.
Yeah. So, Paul, we have a few more questions coming in for you. And this one's really great because about 1/3 of our US population are nonverbal. Mirka writes that she has a 7-year-old autistic son, not necessarily nonverbal, but doesn't speak much. What resources you think would help him to communicate more? So, Paul, before you start your answer with that, Mirka, so we actually did a workshop 5 weeks ago on nonverbal autism. So I'm going to include that comment in the links. And it's simply about how those with autism can communicate more, because I was nonverbal until I was about 2.5. And I didn't start speaking complete sentences until I was 7. So very much the similar age to your boy. So I'll include the link in the workshop of the workshop in the comments. But Paul, what would you say are some resources that you've seen in the community that could help Mirka with her son?
Well, I know about, I had speech therapy when I was a kid. I remember when I was in elementary school, I couldn't say words that begin that with the th sound. I think one time my speech therapy asked me a question with the word. She was trying to get me to say a word with th in it. So that's what she was trying to do.
Got it. So speech therapy, obviously, Mirka. Well, when I think about therapy, I think about the main 3. I think speech, I think occupational, I think about physical, because I think about the 2 most prominent issues for those with autism being communication and then sensory. And then a third one, which is kind of a little farther off, fine motor. So the physical element. So like Paul said, speech therapy definitely helps. Speech therapy was tremendous towards my development. Hey, Anita. So Anita writes, Paul, how did you find your mentor? And how important did you believe it is for those on the spectrum to find someone who can be a positive influence and guide them through challenging times?
Well, during my legislation days, I had 3 main mentors. I spoke about them earlier. First was Ann Bullard, Judith Usetti, and then Claire Dees. I think once you have someone, I think it's more of like a trust issue, and I trust these 3 women. I trust these 3 women in the autism community.
Absolutely. I love that. And just to follow up a little bit on what Anita said is, for those on the spectrum to find someone who can be a positive influence and guide them through challenging times, have you had to rely on your mentors more recently because of COVID-19 and kind of just this whole routine change, or about the same?
I think to me it was more like a mental game. I felt like since I work in the medical field, I know what to do. I know what's going to happen. Funny thing was, I watched Pandemic on Netflix a week before everything shut down.
Oh, no, that was not a good idea.
Well, the reason why I was watching it was because they were talking about anti-vaxxers in that thing. Yeah. So that was the reason why I watched it in the first place. And I felt like, I think at this time, I think it was probably a month before lockdown, if I have to be honest with myself. But I said, okay, I felt that was a good thing to learn, because now I know what to expect from what's going to happen. Like you said, I wouldn't recommend it, but from someone who works in the medical field, I think it was eye-opening for me to understand.
Got it. We had a few more questions come in, and now I'm scrolling up. Debbie wrote, what would you consider high functioning? So obviously, I myself don't really like functioning labels. I would prefer low support and high support needs. But Paul, if you kind of had to put high functioning autism in the conversation, what would you consider high functioning autism? I don't even know how I would consider it.
well, what I will explain to them is basically, does the person needs support, how much support does that person need? Like you're saying, you like saying high support or low support. I think it's like, how much support does this person need?
Yeah, that's exactly how I kind of think about it. Just if they need a lot of support versus low support. And the thing that kind of bothers me sometimes about high functioning and low functioning is that I would be considered high functioning in terms of I'm a public speaker. I give talks in the schools. I give talks to autism groups. But my sensory challenges that I still have to this day are not high functioning. They're kind of in the middle. They would be like, if you would call it moderate functioning. You know what I mean, Paul? So it's like,
yeah. I think people won't know. I think also tell people, if I tell someone I'm autistic, they said, I didn't know you were autistic, because we don't have a look. And
go ahead.
But I also have this feeling that other autistics identify other autistics. And I don't know if there's any scientific proof of that, but I think that'll be a good scientific study. But I don't know how the legality of it will be.
I love what you just said there, because I get that a lot too. I get Carrie, you have autism, but you don't look like you have autism. And I feel like it's important for people at home to watch, to know it's that we're both autistic, but I mean, there's no look to autism. Like, it is a spectrum. There are going to be people not only with autism, but they're going to be people with a wide range of disabilities that you're never really going to know if they have that disability unless they point blank say.
My mom always said everybody has some type of disability.
Yeah. Jesse writes, and Jesse was actually one of our self-advocate interviews for our Facebook Live. Jesse writes, "Hey, Paul, it has been my experience that there is not a lot of tolerance for those with mild disabilities. Do you find this is the case with your mild case of autism?"
I think it's if I'm understanding what her question is, I think it's more of, do people think you're not autistic because you don't act autistic? I think it's more of, I think it's more like, this is a tough question. I think it's more like, I don't think it's how I describe it, but I don't describe it as, I just try to get people visualize what my autistic is when I say mild. Because people think, when someone says the word autism, they think of like someone who's low function. I'm sorry I say that, but they don't think of other things. So I just say, I put emphasis on the word spectrum more than the whole autism thing.
Got it. No, I absolutely agree with that. I do the same. So, Paul, we had a question come in. And again, everyone, my name is Dr. Carrie Magra, public speaker and autistic self-advocate, speaking with my friend and a fellow self-advocate, Paul Silver, tonight as part of this Facebook Live. I am so sorry. Chiring writes, "My son is 6. He repeats everything. What he hear, how to stop." So I think what she's trying to say, and please, if you want to write in the comments and just let me know if I'm not understanding this correctly, is she's trying to help with some of her child's mimicking behaviors. Now, a lot of children mimic things they see on television, words they hear from their peers. Was this ever a struggle for you, Paul? And how are some of the ways that you helped yourself with that?
I think it was more like, me repeating stuff I saw on TV, and I think my mom told me to stop. And when I tell parents to, if they want to stop repeating themselves to their kids, I usually tell them, keep doing it because it may help them. So I may not like it, but it helps. But when it
Yeah,
comes to like
absolutely.
repeating himself, but when it comes to him repeating himself, I would just tell him, I would just do like cues. I see a lot of parents of autistic people do like put their hand up to like lower their voice. I talk real loud, and some people how to do that. I remember I was doing during the early days of the pandemic. I was doing all the grocery shopping for the family, and I'm on the phone with my mom talking about what she needs on her grocery list. This woman grabs my hand and says, "You're talking too loud." Now we're in a pandemic, and you should not grab me. And I know I should not be talking too loud. I just thought that's not the proper way to grab me.
Yeah. She followed up and she said, not only TV that he mimics, but whatever he hears, like even sound of a bathroom flush. Did sounds ever affect you and like mimicking different sounds?
Like sounds from a toilet. I don't think that's ever. I never did that. But if like, I think there's certain words that kids say that should be that I call inappropriate, and I think when I learned those inappropriate words, I had to train myself to say, "You can't say that." So basically, yeah. I call it like a mental game.
Got it. So Lynn wrote in and she is talking about anger. Did you ever, because there's some kids I work with as a mentor to so many people on the autism spectrum who kind of get down on themselves for their diagnosis. For somebody out there who might be watching this, who is having some difficulty loving themselves and loving who they are, regardless if they have a diagnosis or not, what would you tell them? What would be some comforting words that you would tell them to just let them know, like, this is who you are and you should be empowered by it?
Well, I always hear the phrase, you should love yourself. And I think another way is I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love that. Because I know there are people who kind of, again, see autism as like a curse and granted, autism is a spectrum and there are some very intense challenges that go along with that sometimes. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone should feel like autism itself is a curse. There are definitely some comorbidities that affect certain things with an autism diagnosis. But we have a few people writing in saying, I love what you do. Loud music, he doesn't like it. He shouts at me. Yolanda writes, what do you think of ABA therapy? Do you find it helpful? You mentioned you had ABA therapy, right, Paul?
I don't think so, but I think I did have speech therapy and probably some occupational therapy. When it comes to ABA therapy, I know there's some misunderstandings of ABA therapy, but I remember I was listening to a story about an ABA therapy center that was accused of abusing kids, and I knew some of the people that worked at that facility. So I talked to another ABA therapist, and I looked at and she showed me her credentials, and then she asked me to look for that person who runs that ABA therapy's credentials. That person did not have the credentials that she had. So I thought maybe it's more a credential issue than a credential issue, but I think it's more of if you should not do certain things to an autistic kid. But I think it's more of...
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Yolanda, we just did a workshop on ABA therapy a few weeks back, where I talked a little bit about kind of the positives of ABA, the negatives of ABA, and the importance of how to actually go about finding an ABA therapist in your area. So definitely check out my website, carriemagro.com. That will have that webinar on there as well. It's a good watch. It shares a lot of leading resources from some of the best experts in the field. Jason writes, and this is interesting. Hey, Jason. Jason writes, I'm wondering why my 7-year-old flicks things forever at times. He'll flick a straw, anything that bends easily. Now that he's older, he'll tear paper and fold it to flick. What does stimming do for him? Does anyone really know? Paul, did you ever stim as a kid?
I think I remember I counted tiles at my local swimming pool. But when it came to him in this situation, when I have a dinner roll, I like to pull it apart, feel it, and all that good stuff with it. So I think it's more of, I don't consider that stimming. I just think it's like a tick, basically, in my view.
Right. Yeah. So, Jason, I think everyone stems a little bit. Even during this interview, you can't see my hands off screen, but I'm rubbing my hands together as a coping mechanism sometimes when I feel a sensation that I'm not necessarily sure about, whether it's the fans on my AC unit hitting my skin or going away for a quick second. We all stim. Some of us stim a lot. Some of us twirl in circles as a way of self-regulating ourselves. So there's a lot of different things that go along with that. But it's important for us, everyone, to know. Groups such as the Autism Society of American Autism Speak say it's okay to stim as long as it's not affecting their learning and it's not leading to any self-injurious behavior. So
yeah, when I was in school, there was another autistic boy, and he always brings his toy cars with him. And I think he likes playing with the rolling on the surface, and it upsets him when the teacher takes the toys away. So I had to teach him a phrase that I said to him, "What happens if you bring your toys?" And he replies, "The teacher will take it away from me." So I think it's more like a tip. It's more like something that they want. It's a coping mechanism. Like sometimes I try to hold myself or stutter. Like you see me stutter a lot through this interview. It's because I call it my stuttering nerves, but it's also because I feel like I hope I'm answering the question correctly from you.
Yeah, no, I think that says it pretty well, actually, Paul. So again, everyone, my name is Dr. Carrie Magro, professional speaker, best-selling author, and autistic self-advocate here with Paul Silver. We have been with you for almost the past hour now, talking a little bit about Paul's autism journey. Paul, what is next for you? Obviously, coding, graduating, you're on the dean's list. For people watching at home, congrats again on that. That's amazing. What are some of the things that you got next for you after graduation? What are some hopes you have? Finding a job, getting a girlfriend, going in a relationship, getting married? What are some of your things, both personal and professional, you hope for yourself?
Well, once I graduate, I graduate and get my certification. Is to find there to either work at the practice I work now, doing coding and billing, or find another position that does medical coding and billing. The thing what I miss the most is I haven't, to be honest with you, Carrie, since I moved to Florida, I haven't been doing any legislation work. And truth be told, I live in Melbourne, Florida, which is like near Cocoa Beach. That's a long drive from Tallahassee. So I may have to start something else to get advocacy working, because I would like to see some more work done on adults with autism and their needs. Because like I told you in the beginning, the services for adults are not the best.
Yeah, no, I agree. Paul, if you have just an extra minute, I would just love to ask you about the whole question about when the school bus stops coming. Why do you think so many supports are so geared towards children versus adults?
I think it's because people see it more in children than adults. Because I remember I was at a autism convention a couple of years ago, and this man, I just talked to this man. He said, "I just been diagnosed when I met him, he said he was diagnosed 2 months ago." I think a lot of people can't see the signs when they were kids, and I think a lot of our medical professionals can't diagnose adults as pediatricians are going to diagnose kids now, because my pediatrician was not the first person to diagnose me. It's just a teacher had to say something, and today teachers are afraid to say things like that.
Yeah. Paul, is there anything else you would like for people at home to know about your journey?
I don't. I don't think anything else I could say.
Any final words, any messages that you would like to give to parents, self-advocates, educators, and therapists who are kind of looking at, we're getting the vaccine now, hopefully we'll get back to a new normal. Any positive messages of hope you would like to leave with people tonight?
I would just say it gets better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Well, again, everyone, thank you for joining us. This is our weekly Facebook Live where we highlight self-advocates to celebrate neurodiversity. My name is Dr. Kerry Magra. Again, this is my guest, Paul Silver. Again, this is actually part of my 501c3 nonprofit organization where I've interviewed over 150 self-advocates impacted by a wide range of diagnoses. So if you would like to consider making a tax-deductible donation to support our work so we can make this nonprofit sustainable, so we can continue to do this for many years to come, this is the donation link right down here. It's also in the comments of this Facebook and YouTube video. And thank you all so much for joining us. And we will be back next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will be highlighting another self-advocate. So thank you all so much and have a great night.